My name is Nate Winters, and I'm the National Sales Manager at Troon Vineyard.
I'm Nate Wall, and I'm the winemaker at Troon.
And I'm Sarah Thompson. I'm the assistant winemaker at Troon.
Great. And could you guys tell us a little bit about Troon Vineyard? Where are you located and what kind of wine do you make?
Yeah, so Troon Vineyard is located in Southern Oregon, on the southwest side of Oregon. We're about 60 miles from the ocean and around 20 so miles from the California border. So our climate's very Mediterranean-like. You know, we get really warm, hot days, but then cold nights at the same time. A really big influence from this coastal wind that we get that makes its way to us from the ocean every day. As far as geology, we're in this ancient mountain range that was built kind of by the ocean. So marine sediment, granite, a little bit of clay, and alluvial gravel. So our wines are very French inspired, and they kind of reflect that as well. So lower alcohol levels, very aromatic wines. The winemaking team here will tell you a little bit about their philosophy, but very hands-off and minimal intervention. This year we got certified biodynamic and organic through CCOF, and we're pursuing a regenerative organic certification as well. And I'll let Nate and Sarah talk a little bit more about that.
2020 we were certified, not 2021.
Oh yeah, I'm lost. Yeah, but other than that, as far as the winemaking, I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions as far as how that goes. But because we put so much emphasis on the farm, we really don't want to cover up that fruit by any means of human intervention if we don't have to. We have a lot of diversity because of the biodynamics. So from an apple orchard to bees, incoming sheep and dogs and chickens, along with grains and grasses and brassicas and a full garden that we're going to be, ideally in the farmer's market in the future for a lot of our vegetables. But trying to make the best quality fruit that we can.
It's the main goal for sure.
So can you guys tell us a little bit about your winemaking philosophy and farming and how that relates to that?
Sure, I guess we'll start with farming because that's really where it all starts. As Nate mentioned, we are now fully organic and biodynamic certified. That's a 3-year transition period. So from basically we got new owners almost a little over 3 years ago. And the first thing they did, along with Craig being retained as their general manager, made the decision to stop any inputs that were not allowed under the organic or biodynamic program. So we had actually been live certified previously to that. So low input viticulture and enology certification from Oregon. And so that's a sustainability certification. So there was already not maybe the full leap to go, but there's still a lot allowed under live that is not allowed under either organic or biodynamic programs. So the first step was to stop any practices that were allowed under live, but not under the organic and biodynamic. And then that's kind of started our clock ticking on transition. But that's simply stopping spraying things is really the bare minimum difference as you start transitioning over into these other farming practices. It's an entire mindset shift. So with with certainly conventional and even some of the kind of sustainable minded practices, what you end up doing is you're trying to use like the least harmful things to the vineyard. So you're still spraying stuff, but you're trying to have it be less bad. Biodynamics flips that around completely, and it's, how healthy can we make the vineyard system so that it is naturally resilient. So let's try to focus on, rather than putting the Band-Aid over the problem, let's actually try to cure the disease, the dis-ease of the vineyard, and make it healthy and flourishing so that it doesn't require any of those sprays that you were using to prop up that health. So a lot of the conventional or even some of the sustainable lower sustainable level vineyards kind of have a veneer of health, and that health is kind of brought about by all of the inputs, particularly the synthetic inputs they're getting from the farming system. And so right away, what you have to do is you rip that Band-Aid off, and And that starts that. What's kind of interesting about that is you do learn the true health status of your vines. The second you stop kind of giving them this, this kind of drip line junkie injection of this suite of compounds, the vines respond and tell you, just how healthy they are or aren't. And so biodynamics takes that holistic step of, okay, let's understand where we're at, where the health of our vineyards are, and then let's start building, strengthening those vines. So that's kind of what we've been doing this past 3 years. And even now that we're certified, the thing about biodynamics in particular, and a new certification that we're going for, which is called regenerative organic, it's brand new. It's really just gotten a pilot. So if you haven't seen or heard of it, you will likely start seeing and hearing about it. But that's kind of the next thing for us. But it's just such a process. Like, the 3 years, you're not just done. Like, we're constantly adding both to the diversity and the biodiversity of the farm, adding to the processes that we do ourselves, certainly with biodynamics, trying to gain the ability and the understanding to make more and more of our own preparations, those kind of BD 500 through 508, those preparations that we apply either directly to the vineyards or to our compost piles. Learning how to make those ourselves rather than just buying it from something like JPI, Josephine Porter Institute, where a lot of people purchase their biodynamic preps. So it's constantly learning and evolving, and it will, even though we're definitely not done. We will be adding to our practices and improving our diversity, improving the resiliency of our system for years to come, really. But that is key. Like, if you have one takeaway of this, the huge difference between both biodynamic and regenerative organic type procedures is diversity. And it's because in a conventional system, which is monoculture, it's not just monoculture plant, but it's like monoculture, like microbiology as well, because so many of those chemicals that you're using to suppress disease just like sterilize the soils and sterilize the plants. And so what happens then is, nature abhors a vacuum. And so if you've got like just a blank canvas, something is going to try to fill it. And it's almost always going to be what you don't want. So in the case of the soils, it's always going to be, weeds and just unhealthy population growth there. And in the terms of the vines, it'll be, mildews and or in the vine diseases, start getting fungal infections and things like that, because there's nothing beneficially present occupying those niches. The idea then with this kind of regenerative ag and biodynamics is filling all of those niches with a healthy, functioning ecosystem, so that is inherently stable. And so there isn't, invaders that want to cause disease in those systems. There's no place for them. Those spots are already totally filled up. And so that's the journey that we're on, and that kind of complexity, really trying to build a diverse ecosystem on your farm, takes years of nudging and kind of encouraging to get that system up and running. But that's the journey we're on here.
So the regenerative agriculture aspect, like this certification, what I can understand, it would be helpful if you could explain to us, is this a different, does this involve different techniques or philosophical approaches to farming than biodynamics? Or is it just trying to take away the historical stigma that biodynamics was kind of associated with eugenics and a lot of kind of unpleasant philosophies and ideas and thinkers in Germany and Austria at the time that it was kind of being implemented? Correct.
Yeah. I mean, it's, these practices, these best practices in farming, have been known for, centuries, really. And you're right, like the birth of biodynamics has definitely had a kind of checkered past. And particularly some of the aspects of biodynamics, which is, some aspects of the biodynamic calendar, for example, certainly make a lot of inherent sense. They basically just mimic the Farmer's Almanac. But then other aspects of it are a little less tangible. And so I think what regenerative organic is trying to do is keep, they're not really basing off biodynamics, they're building their own structure, but it has the similar mindset of building ecosystem, like kind of the farm as an ecosystem, building that health up from the ground up. And then really kind of looking in a holistic view of what you're doing, not just in your farm, but like your entire like business as well. There's in a regenerative organic, there's also social justice pillars, for example, that you need to achieve. So in some ways, regenerative organic goes beyond biodynamics because it does add some of these other pillars. But I think it is going to be they're very similar, like what they ask that you do on the farm, but I think the regenerative organic may be a little more easily comprehensible by the kind of the population at large, and really reaches the same endpoints. Like up until regenerative organic certification became available, and like I said, it's really basically still in pilot. There was no regenerative organic certification, because the organic certification in and of itself has nothing to do with regenerative practices. Many organic farmers are quite regenerative, but there's literally the organic program is just don't use this stuff in your organic. I mean, there's no beyond that. There's no like principles or practices or no-till agriculture or composting, or none of that is embedded into the national organic program as it is, as it exists from the USDA. So I think the regenerative organics is going to get us as close, to that as possible. Biodynamics was and still continues to be really the only regenerative organic certification you can get on a farm up until this new one comes along.
Okay, so like maybe just to kind of give people a big picture, and I've heard this kind of explained to me in this way, and I just want to check if it might be something that you guys would agree with, is if we want to think about it, organics is about what not to input into the farming, and biodynamics is what not to input plus things that you should also input to really focus on microbial life in the soil, and that's where the regenerative comes in, because you're trying to regenerate life in among the microbes in the soil itself, rather than worrying about the superficial nature of the plants above the ground. Is that kind of like a good kind of general overview of the difference between maybe organics and biodynamics? And then the regenerative, it sounds like it's adding a context to it, which is kind of an ideology that goes beyond just the farming practices, but really wanting to implement good practices in the condition of the workers, and kind of adding like a social justice element. So you're holistic and being regenerative, not just for the soil and the farming, but the society as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. That's really helpful. And could we, connected with this, I think what's interesting for us coming from the outside is that, it sounds like biodynamic farming, it can't be done it has to be done in a context, right? So what that means is that depending on the land that you're in and the conditions that you're experiencing, the way that you would implement these practices could be very different than in another location. So could you tell us a little bit about Kubli Bench and kind of the geography of where you are, and how, what kind of weather system or experiences you have in your particular geography, and how that may impact the grapes you're growing and the wine that is being produced? Because I understand that there's a relationship, even though you're not by the ocean, you are influenced by the ocean. Is that right?
Nate or Sarah, just since I've been talking a lot, you want to jump in?
Yeah. I mean, we're still a fair distance away from the ocean, but we do get really cool ocean breezes that come straight into like a funnel through the valley. So in that sense, we do get a bit of an influence from that. But as far as our climate goes, I think we are really, really lucky for where we have been fortunate enough to grow these grapes, because we have very little disease pressure out here. In a sense, we're pretty dry. We don't have to deal with mildew problems or anything like that. There's no like rot out here. So in a sense, we're sort of perfect for biodynamics, because we don't have any sort of like really scary pressure that, would be tempting for us to use a bunch of chemicals on. And our soil does a really good job of retaining water. So we also don't have to irrigate very heavily. We test for water in the plants throughout the year during the growing season to make sure that we're not stressing out the vines too much. And we will irrigate when necessary. But as far as like implementing biodynamics goes in our climate, it's very much tailored to what our vineyard and what our plants actually need versus just doing this blanket biodynamic farming technique over it. So what our biodynamics looks like is very different from something you would see in the Willamette Valley or in the Columbia Gorge or something like that, because we're tailoring it exactly to what we need on this property. Yeah, so that's
like when you go down to Texas. Nate and I had an opportunity to go to the Texas Wine and Grape Symposium last year, and that's a stark contrast. When you have a climate that doesn't permit you to do anything but use sulfur or copper in your vineyard because the disease pressure is so high. I think Sarah hit the nail on the head, is that we're just, we have the opportunity in this climate to do minimal intervention as far as farming goes and have a really good impact. And just like any good region of the world, I think we have all the good factors. The wind that we get from the ocean, it's a cooling wind, so it cools our region down, whereas other parts of the world you can have warming winds and whatnot. So we kind of have all the variables working for us.
So what that means is that you get really hot days and cool nights.
Yes.
And
our
how
diurnal
does that,
shift is insane.
and how does that affect grape growing, the grapes that are being grown there?
That's
Well,
the best part.
yeah, we maintain incredible acidity because of our really cold nights. Like sometimes during the summer, we'll have a day that's like above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And then at night, it'll drop down into like 60 degrees, which, the grapes are still ripening and developing flavors, but then at night they have a chance to kind of chill out and, maintain acidity rather than dropping all of that out. And so we're able to create these really like naturally balanced wines without any sort of manipulation because of that temperature change at night, which is really incredible.
And that's something pretty unique to the Applegate Valley, because what's interesting is, I live literally, it's 25 minutes away, but it's just over one ridge line. So I actually live in Jacksonville, which is part of the Bear Creek Valley, which is kind of one ridge to the east of here. And that cooling effect doesn't extend, 25 minutes away. So, Applegate Valley is generally an east-west trending valley. So like Nate said, it's 60 miles from the ocean. But as you get all that hot air heating up, right, it's rising and it's creating this vacuum that's basically pulling in the cool air from the ocean. Like it's interesting when we're planting our new apple orchard, a couple different plants a year, where we've got about 150 so far. We're planting another 100 this year of French cider apple cultivars, and we only have to stake it like one direction, these baby trees, because like 95% of our wind all comes, from the west to the east. Like it's almost not, we don't even need to stake the trees any other way, because it's all the breezes that's coming from the ocean. And that's, so we're surrounded by, I guess it's also kind of, we are surrounded down here in Southern Oregon. We have 3 different mountain ranges. We have the Klamath and the Siskiyous. The Siskiyou is kind of like between the California and Southern Oregon border there. We also have the Cascades on the other side of us, which is the much newer, younger volcanic. That's Mount Hood, Mount Shasta. The volcanic peaks are all part of that Cascade Ridge, but those are much younger of age. And then we've got the Klamath Mountains as well that come in. So we have all these different mountain ranges, and that funnels, wind in different ways. And we also have a lot of different elevations. So, we're at about 1,300 feet here in the Willamette Valley. Like, 600 feet is 700 feet is considered at elevation. So, we've got a lot of different elevations, and because of all these different mountain ranges, a lot of different like aspects, like the direction that the vineyard's facing in terms of like facing the sun. Troon's almost completely a south-facing slope, so it just makes this area really diverse, really unique, and kind of perfect for biodynamics and all sorts of low input type viticulture, because with lower disease pressure, with kind of this perfect climate that dries out. So, Sarah was mentioning we will use irrigation if we need it, but we do have a pretty good clay content in our soil. So especially as our vines get healthier, and we can actually use irrigation to train a little bit these young vines as we're planting, to train the roots down deep. We're planning to be able to not irrigate at all eventually. We're right on the cusp. We get significantly less rainfall than Willamette Valley, like almost less than half, I think, of the rainfall that Willamette Valley gets. So we're right around 23 to 25 inches of rain per year here, which is kind of the cutoff of what you might be able to successfully dry farm. So our goal is dry farming. We're not there yet, but I think we have the capability of getting there.
And what is the benefit of dry farming? Because as you probably know, in the kind of natural wine consumer world, I think dry farming has become quite a kind of benchmark that many people will say, oh, I don't even drink wine unless it's made with grapes that have been dry farmed. So why is there an aspiration to dry farm? How does it, what's the difference between grapes that have been dry farmed or not?
Well, one thing I want to point out is a lot of that is actually coming from Europe. So a lot of the vineyards in Europe are dry farmed, but they have a very different climate than we do. They get rainfall in the summer and into the fall, like we don't. I mean, it's a spigot that just turns off in June, and like we do not receive almost a drop of rain until sometimes October. So it's part of that is, if we were in a climate that received rainfall during the growing season, it would be very easy to dry farm. But when all of your, in a true Mediterranean climate, when all of your rainfall comes during the dormant season, that's a different scenario, a different question. So like what we need to do, and what kind of regenerative organic practices allow you to do, is by increasing soil organic matter content, which both opens up the soils, makes it more porous, and allows for more water infiltration. And then also soil organic matter is a sponge that can hold water for long periods of time. So those practices will allow us to actually hold more water in a form that the plants will be able to access throughout our growing season that receives no rainfall whatsoever. So, I mean, the idea though is a better concept of terroir, right? Like a better, if you're over irrigating, worst case scenario, those vines are going to get lazy and the roots are going to stay fairly shallow, because all the water is just being dripped on top. So there's very little incentive for them to go down, to dig deep and to seek out, like try to hit that parent rock and to truly, reflect that sense of place. Both well utilized irrigation can mimic that to a very similar extent and encourage those vine roots to go deep. It's just you have to farm, for your location. If we were in the Willamette Valley, absolutely, we would be dry farming. They get much more rainfall during the rainy season, and they have the similar clay contents to their soil to be able to hold a lot of that water for the growing season. Down here, we are much drier. And so, dry farming, we, will, in general, people who don't need to irrigate shouldn't irrigate. All they're going to try to do is the berries will swell up with water. They're getting more water than the vine needs, and that'll mask terroir, lead to less interesting and complex wines, particularly red wines that get too much water. It affects tannin development. So, but conscientious irrigation, particularly in climates that need it, I think can be on par with what people are looking for in terms of dry farming.
And to that effect, as you talk, you've been comparing and contrasting Willamette Valley. What is the difference? Because I think most of us are familiar with Oregon, and we associate that with the Willamette Valley. It's kind of our default, right? And so I think the association is, oh, if you're in Oregon, you must be farming Chardonnay and Pinot. Do you guys farm any Chardonnay and Pinot? And if not, why is that? And what kind of grapes do you grow?
Nate, you are muted.
There's an orchestra of birds in the garden. It's really loud.
Biodiversity.
Yeah. We don't grow any Chardonnay or Pinot. No. And again, it's all of our ripening cycle, essentially, in our growing season. We have a growing season that in the fall, our days become really short, and we can't really get that really extended growing season. We can ripen these things like Tannat and Mourvèdre and Syrah that ripen later, but we can't do things like Cabernet or Zinfandel to a really big extent. Now, with that being said, Chardonnay and Pinot, they ripen really quickly. Pinot will always be like the first to the tape. And in a really warm climate like we have, it ripens the Pinot so fast that the Brix accumulation of sugar, it really forces your hand to pick that grape early before the phenolic development gets there. So the 2 ripening cycles will be physiological and then the phenolic. And for us, we really want to develop the phenols in the skins. And when we, after the smoke cleared, we got extra like 2 weeks of great sunlight. So we let our grapes hang because we have those cold temperatures. We're not developing sugar or losing acid at a rate that we have to pick it. We can let these grapes really develop more flavor. And if you had Pinot here, you wouldn't really get a chance to do that. It would just ripen way too quickly. You pick the fruit and you make a wine that's kind of like a monotone cherry wine. But up in Willamette Valley, you have that cooler growing season that allows the sugar to slow down and you develop flavor with the sugar. That's just kind of the setting here where we don't want to fight Mother Nature. And our climate is a little bit more friendly to ripening these Tannat and Malbec and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you can, any climate that's warm enough, you could put Pinot and Chardonnay in a lot of those, earlier ripening varieties. But just because you can, it doesn't mean you should. So there's Pinot Noir that gets picked in, probably even almost late July, if not early August in certain parts of California. They can put it at 10 tons an acre, and that's how you can still get like $7.99 Pinot Noir. But it doesn't have any opportunity to ripen flavors. What's beautiful about the Willamette Valley, for example, is because of those cooler temperatures, it allows the flavors to match with the Brix. So it's like when you're looking at kind of ripening development, think of like kind of like a chart where Brix starts accumulating and it slowly goes up, and your acid actually starts in a grape. The acid is highest right at veraison. From the point of veraison, acid starts falling as the grapes start metabolizing some of that acid to actually help with some of their metabolic needs. So you've got, and then you also have like kind of flavor development or tannin development. So like the idea is the sugar development and like the flavor development and like the falling acidity should all kind of like reach the right spot and at the same time together. And that's how you've planted the right grape for that site. And so each site, that really is something that people should be looking at independently. Oftentimes there are market drivers and people plant Pinot Noir because they can get more money for Pinot Noir, and they put it in a place where they don't get to hit all those points. At Troon, we have a huge range of grapes we plant specifically because we feel that they can all land in that bullseye for us. So our grape selection here, and particularly as we are replanting parts of our vineyard, we're taking that opportunity to plant different varieties that actually more perfectly match that bullseye, or we think may even more perfectly match that bullseye as climate change continues to creep on. Anything we plant right now that's just at the very, very edge of what people think are possible around here will sadly probably be smack dab in the middle of that bullseye before too long if things don't change dramatically. So it's finding the right grape for the right site is absolutely key to anything else you want to do in the winery, for sure. And near immediate.
So what are you guys excited about right now in terms of the wines that you've made this most recent harvest, and like what's coming down that we have to look forward to?
Well, we've been nerding out on sparkling wine lately. So I think that's, for me personally, I'm the most excited about the sparkling wines that we'll be releasing soon. We played around with like a Lambrusco style that Nate and I were just like spitballing ideas, and we're like, oh, you know what? Let's make that this year. And I'm really excited to release that. As well as, honestly, everything's just really exciting. The Syrahs are just so special here. I feel like we grow Syrah in such a unique region that like it's very different from anywhere else in the United States. Like you just can't get the same flavor profiles anywhere else. So for me, it's just a very special grapes. So I always get excited about the Syrah and the sparkling wine, like the sparkling Tannat. That's so unique. Like you don't see that anywhere, but we grow Tannat and we're able to get the flavor ripeness, as well as like maintaining that really, really high acidity to get a beautiful sparkling wine that we think we nailed even better this year. So it's just exciting.
Yeah, I think, every year we get closer to where we want to be. And with the 19 vintage, that was the year that Nate took over winemaking. And that's the year you're going to see the hugest, the biggest personality shift with these wines. And I'm just excited for all of these new vintages. We've had some 19s in the market, and you've seen the difference from that carbonic macerated Grenache and the amber wines. That's just a little dipping your toes into what's going to come. As Sarah mentioned, the sparkling wines. We'll have a Lambrusco style, we'll have the Piquette, and we'll have the Pétrinat. We'll have two different amber wines, the introductory, and then we'll have the amphora. And the amphora is just so unique, 10 months in the clay on the skins. It's just a very waxy, briny wine, which I really like that. But my favorite grape is Syrah. And it's such a chameleon anywhere you put it that, as Sarah said, it reflects our site so well. And what we've done in the past that I'm looking forward to the most out of all these wines is actually the use of whole cluster and stems and really accentuating this fruit, which we had kind of really flat Syrah in the past, which this has life to it and energy and so much more color that I just really look forward to this Syrah and these red wines under Nate's hand.
And we heard that you might be having launching some new labels. And Sarah, were you helping with the design of that? Can you tell us a little bit more about the creative process? Yeah,
so it was sort of not intentional in a sense, because I was creating artwork for our educational garden that we've been developing over the past year. So basically I was just doing botanical drawings for all of the different biodynamic preparations that we're growing on the property. And one day our general manager just like comes up to me with his iPad and he's like, "Sarah, look, I put your drawings in as a label design. Do you like it?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's really cool." And so we just decided to move forward with it. I was not drawing anything intending for it to be a label, but it just so happened to work out that way. And moving forward, we might be looking into doing some more label design. Art is my other love besides winemaking. So I'm always happy to dabble in something creative and contribute in that way. So it's very exciting.
Well, we're excited to see them when they come out. Will they be?
Can I show you a sneak preview right now?
Yeah, if you could, that would be awesome.
You have to enable my screen share.
Okay, let me see. Share screen. You need to talk me through this. I don't.
You just click my name with the dots and try to make me as a co-host, maybe.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, sounds good. Let me try. Oh, hold on. How do I do that? 1 second. So I make you a co-host?
Can you do that from the dots?
Okay, got it. Hold on. I can't, for some reason
his screen.
Yeah, click on the participants tab and then there should be some little dots.
Okay.
Or you can kind of do more if you mouse over his name.
Yeah,
maybe.
see, I think for some reason I have you, I pinned you. I don't know what that means. So let's see here.
I think it's just disabled for attendees to share their screen. I don't know if you can enable it without restarting the whole thing.
No, I can't. No, hold on. I'm sure we can do this. Just give me a second. I'm just, we just started doing here it is. I got it. Okay, I can make you, can I make you a host?
Yeah.
Okay.
I want all the power.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I think
Goes to his head though, watch out.
there we go.
Okay, now we're in business. Okay, so Chrome, share. All right, you see this?
Yeah.
Going fast. Okay, there we go.
So all the white wines will essentially have yarrow. So it'll be white flowers on here. We're adding a little bit more color to the label, which I think is the best part to really grab people's eyes. The new packaging, we won't have this capsule on the top anymore. We're doing away with that. We can't really recycle that tin, and for sustainability purposes. On the bottle as well, we will have percentages, but we'll also have the new logos. So Demeter On the back side, which you can't see here, we will have a vegan friendly logo, and then Demeter. And then on the wines that aren't fully certified yet, it'll say Certified Biodynamic Winery.
The labels are also going to be printed on a tree-free paper, which is kind of cool.
It's made out of like cane, right? Cane sugar. Yeah.
And then the red will have the valerian. So botanicals on the back will have, this is the first sentence of the description will stay the same about our philosophy, but then after that, it'll have a personal description about the wine or the botanical on there. So it'll be a little customized. But I think that should be received a little bit better than the back label. This is more representative of the wine that's in the bottle. It's not so classic. It's a little bit more progressive, and I hope this brings some life to it and makes all of our jobs easier in selling it.
I do think that like you use the word life, and that really represents the way that the wine has changed, because it's really more of a living product now, and you can feel that when you're drinking it. It has a lot more like spirit to it, and I think that the labels represent that a lot better now, not so traditional looking and almost conventional looking, you know.
Maybe I can give you an idea of just what the vineyard little kind of looks like here as far as the mountains. There we go. So lots of cover crops. Going back to kind of dry farming, as far as what Nate was saying as well, of, you know, we can dry farm as much as we can, but we have these cover crops that need a little bit of water, and they fight these baby vines. So we have to irrigate for the time, but we are working towards no irrigation. But all those cover crops out there is really helpful.
And can we segue from this into a conversation about the cellar work and like, you know, Nate and Sarah, what's your vision for the winemaking process at Troon? Like, how do you approach making wine? And maybe we can start with the still wines. And which wines do you make in the most volume?
Let's see, maybe we should go backwards on that. And they, so the most volume, we have a lot of Syrah planted, and we also are having a lot of Grenache planted. The baby Grenache though, so it'll be a while before we have that. But and then Tannat, and then Vermentino. If I had to, like, those three varieties are what we have the most in-ground acreage planted. Yeah, so and most of the Tannat is co-fermented with the Malbec for the Cuvée Pyrenees. We found that both that co-fermentation, we're able to harvest them at roughly the same time, well, exactly the same time, and they're at slightly different places. The Tannat is like just about right, and the Malbec is just a little overripe to make that happen. But then the co-fermentation really, I think, brings out the best characteristics of both of those varietals and creates something unique for us. So, so in terms of production, I think Syrah and Vermentino are our two largest in terms of cases per year, and then like in terms of the estate level, kind of those, and then after that, it probably is, yeah, probably Tannat maybe. Or some of the, or well, the white blends as we start making those too, like the Cote Kubli blends are probably next in line in terms of actual case production. Stylistically, in terms of winemaking, so I was up in the Willamette Valley for over 10 years, and I think that really influenced my winemaking that I bring to Troon with Pinot Noir. So much of that is very minimal intervention, because with Pinot there's no place to hide. You know, it's such a transparent variety that there's, you know, anything that's more than a gentle nudge is just obvious in final wines. And so kind of working in that way for so long, it just kind of came second nature to apply it to wines that maybe aren't as often produced in that way, which would be a lot of the Rhone and Southern French, kind of south of France, Languedoc and Roussillon type varieties. So I think that approach, it's like a Pinot Noir approach, only to Rhone varieties, which is a lot of what a lot of the newer producers, you know, in those regions are doing. But it is allowing that fruit to speak. We don't use any new oak. We do not have a single new oak barrel, in our cellar. We do buy a couple seconds, but mostly third and fourth fills, where other people start calling those neutral. We actually still see the oak in them, certainly compared to our neutral oak. And when we say neutral, we mean like 10 years old barrels, like it's neutral. And some people will say, oh, after 3 years, it's neutral. It's like we get those barrels that they're selling as neutral, and we consider them oaky. And we, in fact, only use those with Tannat and Malbec. That's the ones that we find can actually integrate even what others would consider neutral oak. I consider still kind of has still some oak tannin left to impart. And it's only the Tannat and Malbec that can integrate those in a way that doesn't overwhelm the variety. The Syrah and definitely the Grenache. Grenache is almost as transparent as Pinot Noir, if maybe even more so in its own way. And so, with the flip-flop of Pinot Noir is a very reductive variety, and Grenache is an incredibly oxidative variety. So while they share many similarities in terms of their the wine styles that they produce, the wine making is actually almost opposite of those two. But
can you talk a little about as far as what I've seen since you've been here, these wines, they have very delicate and like lifted aromatics. They're very bright. And how you said, you don't want to over manipulate Pinot. Maybe you can talk about how the ending wine gets that way, as far as, your punch down or extraction is gentle. You let the yeast build up on the cap, things like that, and on how these things are so different than the dried out versions of what they used to be.
Yeah, so I guess first off, when we were talking about trying to find the right varieties for the right spot, it's also making sure that you're making the wines that would want to be made from that spot. So even when we had Zinfandel, we are never going to make a California big, rich, jammy Zinfandel, and we shouldn't even try. So instead of trying to make like a pale comparison of what someone else can do better, like I focus on what our climate can do better than anyone else. And in terms of like Syrah, which is like what Sarah was saying, which is where I feel it really comes through, is with our warm days and cool nights, like we should not attempt to make these big powerhouse Syrahs. Like what we have that other people can't have is the subtlety and nuance and elegance that we can bring to Syrah, because of that balance that we have of the warm days that allow us to get the flavors and the tannin development, but the cool nights which preserve our acidity. And so stylistically, rather than fighting against that, we embrace that. And so we try to make these wines that are, they're not going to have they're not going to be big, massive wines, although Tannat in general obviously trends that direction. But we go towards elegance and aromatics and try to so the winemaking then becomes more Pinot Noir like, which I think works with the climate, even with these non-Pinot Noir grapes. So like Nate was alluding to, it's very gentle in the winemaking process, even for our red wines, our orange wines, for example. It's a single punch down a day, and that's often by foot, depending on certainly how far we are into fermentation and the amount of whole cluster. Some of them have to be foot tread the whole way, like anything above 50% whole cluster, and we do some 100% whole cluster fermentations. That foot treading is the only way to go. Why struggle to fight that in the cellar? But all those processes then do allow for more elegance. You're not beating up the wines; it's very gentle, and so that's what kind of goes through into the end result. Sarah, you want to jump in here?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would say pretty much all the same things that Nate said, but really like the main kind of outlier we have here would be the Tannat, the Cuvée Pyrenees blend. The Tannat's really the only grape that wants to be treated differently, that doesn't want to be treated like Pinot Noir. We still only do one punch down a day. Like Tannat inherently has these like kind of mouth ripping tannins that we're not trying to over extract. So we want to create balance in those wines. And we think that not not extracting too much is a way to do that. But then we also, when we bring it into the cellar after pressing, we put the Tannat into those, second fill, third fill barrels, because we know that it actually wants that newer oak. I mean, to us, it's new. And it doesn't actually do as well. Like when we're tasting through the cellar, it doesn't do as well if we put it in those really neutral barrels. Like it wants a little bit of that almost vanilla, like toasty characteristic to balance it out. It's a more serious wine for sure, like out of everything. But the Syrah to me is also very serious in its own way. It's just a more nuanced, like delicate. I don't really like the word delicate, maybe elegance better, but it just has so much going for it. And I like that we're not super intense in the extraction of any of the wines. Like overall, if I was the winemaker making the decisions, I would want to do it the same way. I think we're doing it the right way,
Do any of you have any like specific questions as far as sulfur or punch downs or racking or?
Minimal sulfur. We don't add sulfur at crush. We like that oxidative style of winemaking. And we only add when absolutely necessary, usually just for stabilization for bottling. And there's a couple of our wines that never see any sulfur at all. And what did you ask about besides
Those
sulfur?
more red
Question,
wines.
if they had any questions about what we were doing.
Oh, you're asking questions, yeah.
What was that, Luke?
For the couple of wines that don't see any sulfur, those red wines specifically.
It's actually the sparkling wines, since they are actually with the Pétillant Naturel kind of ancestral method process. They're bottled at the end of primary fermentation, and so there's never a dose of sulfur needed. It's the carbon dioxide is basically acting as the preservative in those wines. The carbonic Grenache can almost be no sulfur. I almost decided to not add sulfur last year, but I ended up giving a 20-part add, which probably leads to literally 0 free sulfur in there. But I was a little concerned about malolactic fermentation. Since the carbonic Grenache is an earlier release, it's also in stainless steel the whole time. The malolactic gets like maybe 99% of the way through, but not fully through like it does in barrel. And so if that goes through in bottle, we wouldn't want that instability. So that did get a little bit, but we're tracking it right now. We're going to be bottling that this March, and if it's totally through malolactic and it still has a bunch of CO2 that's still in solution because we're keeping it sealed in stainless steel, then that CO2 can act as the preservative, and we can bottle it without sulfur. But generally all the white wines will all need at least a small amount of sulfur, because you really want to preserve those aromatics, and unintentionally oxidized white wines. Nobody likes those. So they always need a little bit. Yeah.
So stainless steel, mostly 10-year-old oak with some three-year fill, and then amphora.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got the amphora amber vermentino. Is that released now, Nate? Is that out? Okay. That was the first one. We bought 3 amphora in 2019. So that was our first.
Are those from Andrew Beckham?
Yep. Yeah, they're from Andrew. Yep. And so those first 3, we did 2 of them as 100% destemmed but not crushed, and 1 of them as 100% whole cluster. So it was like basically 1/3 100% whole cluster and 2 100% destemmed. And those went in at harvest, and then we didn't press them. They stayed on skins on whole clusters until August of the next year. So we basically pressed them like right now our press is all covered up and in storage, and then in August when we bring it out and start getting ready for the new vintage, the very first thing we press is last year's amphora wine. amber wine. So that had been, on skins for about 10 months.
Do you guys drink
Yeah.
much Radicon or Gravner? Yeah.
Yes.
It's
There you go.
it's kind of the same, stylistically making it, but it's totally different wine because the grapes are way different than Pinot Gris. But I really like that. It doesn't come out like theirs. It comes out very different. But 10 months on skin is incredible.
I think there's also something unique about doing extended maceration with Vermentino because the grape, it's insane. Like when I was digging out those amphora last year, the clusters are still intact. Like they look like we just picked them not that long ago because the skins are so thick and it just doesn't, it's so pulpy. So they don't deteriorate in the amphora. They stay almost preserved in there. So it creates a really unique orange wine. Whereas Pinot Gris, I think, if you were to do that, it definitely like bashes up the grapes a little bit more and you get maybe more bitter tannins out of it. And I really like the balance that we get from the Vermentino. It's pretty unique.
Let's open up the questions to everyone else who's on the call. If anyone has any questions for the team, please feel free to just jump in now.
I had one more thing about amphora though. So we were able to get 2 more amphora this past season. And so we still have those 3 for the amber amphora, but now we have 2 for a white Vermentino. So the roll Vermentino, which had previously received just extended aging in barrel to kind of develop that kind of more denser, lusher palate with the lees aging, is now going to do that in amphora, and it also does it quicker. So it will be on the same timeline in terms of 10 months of aging in amphora is definitely at least equivalent to the 1.5 year aging in barrel, because when you look inside the amphora, the lees coats the entire inside of an amphora. So like with a barrel where all the lees settle down and you kind of, you get lees contact there. Some people of course stir lees. I don't appreciate doing that, but to try to enhance the lees kind of surface contact, the amphora is like 360 degrees of lees contact because clay is a charged particle and the dead yeast cells stick to the entire container, and so you get this kind of accelerated lees aging in a very natural way. So now I'm really excited that we get to do a white amphora this year, white Vermentino in amphora this year as well. So that's going to add that same like richness, but without like any hint of oak whatsoever. So it'll be another really cool wine that's going to be fun to release.
I have 2 more questions.
Yeah.
First question, Sarah, are you approaching winemaking from Nate's perspective from the Willamette Valley or from a different wine region?
Well, my first winemaking experience was actually in the Columbia Gorge. So
we know Nate Reddy.
Yeah, with Nate Reddy. And I have had the privilege to make wine in so many different regions around the world that I've kind of like picked up little things here and there that I think are really important. And so I wouldn't say that it really comes from one region or the other. I think comes from multiple regions, vast majority of where I've been. The only place I would say I didn't really pick up things that I would carry with me is maybe Western Australia, because it was just so different from anywhere I've ever.
Where are all the places that you worked?
I worked in Central Otago in New Zealand, so the South Island, the cooler part of New Zealand where they're growing a lot of Pinot Noir grapes. And I worked in Tasmania as well, which is a bit of a cooler climate in Australia, the island south of Australia. And I've worked in the Willamette Valley. I've worked in the Columbia Gorge. I worked in Napa, which is also it's kind of in line with Margaret River as far as the winemaking style goes. And then I worked in South Africa as well, which is actually interesting how many parallels there are from the very, very tiny micro region I was working in to here. We're growing a lot of similar varietals, minus the Chenin Blanc. But it's really cool. So I can actually take a lot of what I learned in South Africa and apply it here. But the Willamette Valley, it's just such a different growing region. And I do like treating things more delicately, more gently, like you might see in the Willamette Valley with Pinot. Like Nate said, you really can't push that grape to do something it doesn't want to do. So I like the sort of philosophy of working with nature, doing things in the way that it naturally wants to go and not trying to force it in a different direction.
Well, thanks for that and for your artwork.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
The second question I had was, could you talk a little bit more in detail about Kubli Bench, what it is?
So we're in the Applegate Valley, which again is like an east to west running valley for the most part, but we're on the northern end of that valley. And on the northern end, it's kind of, it's like a benchmark piece of land that's raised above the valley floor by a couple 100 feet. So the valley floor is just about 3 football fields away from us. But you could think millions of years ago when this mountain range was being formed, the Juan de Fuca plate in the ocean is crashing into the North American plate and it's sliding underneath Oregon and pushing Oregon up. So layer by layer, we're building this mountain range, but you have rivers over time that carve their way through. Same thing as up in Washington with the floods and whatnot. But here where we are, the Kubli Bench was more like the river bank, where the river kept carving away lower and lower. So we have a completely different geology than the valley floor and that the rest of the Applegate Valley doesn't really get to experience. Think of like a plateau, but along a ridge line. It's about a 3-mile stretch. And to get here either way, you go up a big hill or you leave, you go down a big hill. So it just leads to a different microclimate as far as where the wind hits us. We have sunlight over us. Even right now, it's sun and blue sky above us, but you can see fog everywhere else behind us. These mountains kind of formed right around us, and the bench propelling us higher altitude really just shapes our climate overall. And it's kind of like the thing in Burgundy, right? Where the bullseye gets smaller and smaller from a village to a premier cru to a grand cru. You think of the Applegate Valley, and then you could think Kubli Bench would be a more pristine region. How about that?
Thanks so much. I mean, that's
Yeah, I mean, because it's a little more elevated. There are some vineyards that are on the slopes right around us too. We're on if here's a lot of those slopes though, as you can kind of see, are pretty steep. It's there are very few spots on that slope that could be easily plantable without terracing. Then the Kubli Bench is still has a good slope to it, but not as crazy as the slopes behind Nate there. And then, like he was saying, this is that upper terrace, and then you go down several hundred feet before you kind of get the river valley. So this was like all of these islands, all these mountains used to be islands. And what Nate kind of was mentioning is because of that action, what these all were is old island chains that got scraped and then accreted onto North America, but they come from all over the place. So Southwest Oregon has some of the wildest geology probably in North America. There's very few places that has experienced just as many of these. Like some of these, you can trace to like Japan. Like the geology is very similar. They clearly have come all the way across the Pacific and crashed into the into North America. And some of them you get these plutons, these kind of because of that active plate, you kind of get this intrusions of igneous rock that didn't quite make the surface, but yet they still get degraded and form some of the soils. And if you actually look at those colored maps of the geology of Southwest Oregon, it's just a rainbow. Like if you look at Willamette Valley, there's like 3 colors. I mean, they utilize that really well, but like the geology on here is insane. I mean, there's been tons and tons of PhDs, like dissertations written just trying to understand what's going on down here. So there's a lot of just really unique opportunities to find different types of soils based from different base materials from the just eons of these things smashing in the coast here. So and so the Kubli Bench is just one of those that happens to be granitic. So but that's again not necessarily the case. There's going to be some marine sedimentary, some alluvial, and other parts of even Applegate. But like our part is granitic soils, yeah, from on this raised bench.
We should open up to other questions.
Got a quick one for everybody. You guys have seen a lot of transition change in your vineyard with your different practices and going through all these different certifications. So I'm curious to see like if you've seen or what your experience is in seeing change in the quality of grapes and the quality of wine, or if you have, or if it declined at all, if you've seen anything bad happen where you think you might lose some vines. What kind of risk and what kind of reward have you seen through those changes?
I mean, what's interesting is like, we made the decision to ultimately replant the entire vineyard. And so we started that process about, a little over 2.5 years ago, for a variety of reasons. A lot of these vines were planted from kind of like self-propagated material. So material was brought in, it was propagated on site and then planted out. And so what unfortunately happened is the entire vineyard, a lot of these diseases got propagated across the entire vineyard. And so many of the vines were incredibly sick. And we expected, once we ripped off that Band-Aid, that like the entire vineyard was just going to collapse. And so the idea was, because we had them tested, and it was like kind of like a textbook of what is possible in terms of vine diseases. And we thought that was going to be the end. And so we started this replanting process. Amazingly, that didn't happen. Our vineyards have actually never looked better. And so it's actually kind of sad to pull out some of these vines, but we know we have to, because now we've got completely clean plant material. And if we don't, we're just going to reinfect all of our new plantings. So we kind of have to continue on, but like it has never looked better. And the changes are profound. I hope we're able to put together like a time, like a kind of pictures, like images that show the transformation of here. Because if you had visited us even 2 years ago and you just got dropped down here now, you honestly couldn't tell you were in the same place. Yeah, the changes are profound and like across the entire property, and even vines that we're now removing are giving us the best fruit they ever have. So that definitely shows the promise of biodynamics and kind of the regenerative organic approach to the viticulture. Just how successful it can be on the worst of vines. It can even bring those back to provide just really, really nice fruit. And it's hard to still follow through with our plan, but we kind of have to, especially with how we started spacing things, to get the grapes, the varieties that we want to be growing. So, but yeah, I don't know. Nate, you're on mute for one thing, and you've been here the longest, Nate. So unmute yourself and then. Yeah.
There's so much sounds. I keep going on and off.
Yeah.
The interesting thing to me is, you see the transformation from like a conventional farm to a biodynamic farm, and usually you see a dip in the first year or right when you make that happen, because you're pulling away all the dependencies that farm was depending on, right? And so when you pull those away, you usually see a dip before it gets better. But here it's been such a remarkable thing to actually watch, and I've never worked anywhere else that's happened like this, but every month, every year, the place is so different and better in so many ways. I think the birds, these animals and critters and ducks and geese, we have so much more presence on our farm now, because I think wildlife knows it's a healthier place. That's where they want to raise, their little eggs or their babies or whatever. So I think everything's pointing in the right direction, where it's a slow, we can't just flip a switch, as Craig says. It has to be a slow thing when you're planning for the long term like this, and then you can actually see it, which is the best part. And the offer is always on the table for Luke and Trini and all of your staff anytime to come back. We will try to make the fog not be here this time for you, and you can see for yourselves. You kind of got the short end of the stick last time, but we're always here. We're having a lot more as far as availability of the farm being to people. We're having more, we want maybe benches out there, and we'll have placards next to the plants and why we use these and where we're planting these. So we want it to be a more interactive experience when you do visit the farm. So I think by the springtime, we'll have a new gazebo built for like an education center right in the middle of our farm by the compost and the plant.
Could you repeat the last say 10 seconds or so?
Yeah, you froze up.
Oh, well, oh yeah. So we want to make it the most interactive experience that we can here on the farm with education center and farm tours, video, virtual tours, which, I want to offer as well. If you ever need, if you have a question from a buyer or an account or anything you need where they want to see something, or you can take them on a virtual experience, or, whatever you want to see, it's an open book here from us.
We just got done planting a 92 species native planting. So there's a company down here called Klamath Siskiyou's Seeds, and they actually get permits from the BLM to go and wild harvest these seeds from BLM land around, like right here in the Applegate and the Klamath Siskiyou Mountains. And so we were able to plant out, like I said, 92 different species of truly very native plants, wild harvested here. And that we've got a little walking path that's going to be around there, and some like IDs. So you'll be able to really see all of the different, if you ever, if you went for some hikes in the mountains around here, this is what you'd see growing. So that's something really cool. It'll take a couple of years to fully grow in. Natives are, a little slower to get established, but it's the largest native planting in terms of diversity that they had ever helped put together. So they were pretty psyched to do it. And it was actually this, it's kind of convenient. It was this portion of one of our vineyard blocks that it was just so short. The rows were so short, it wasn't really worth planting. And it happens to be right next to our tasting room. And so I was like, I've got the perfect thing to go in here. So, but the idea behind all this, and we kind of talked a little bit about it, like with some of our cover crops, and every 6th row of our vineyard is actually pollinator habitat. We didn't really mention that, but this one is going to be incredible pollinator habitat. But we call it pollinator. It's not just pollinator, but you're attracting kind of these assemblages of beneficial insects, including like a lot of predatory insects that prey on what would ultimately be vineyard pests. And something like this with these really kind of diverse plantings, we're going to attract like a really cool population of insects. And this is it's over half an acre, so it's right about half an acre. So it's a good size in terms of really having enough space to let those insects have their entire life cycle. So they'll stay on the farm, basically. That's what we're hoping.
Yeah, we should just do an interactive farm tour one of these days. We just walk the video around.
You guys have bees on the premises?
Yeah, it's bees, but it's not bee boxes. So it's these log hives. I don't know if Nate's ever, you can maybe call up a picture, but it's, you hollow out these logs, and the guy who makes them, he's found, so these are European bees, right? So all honeybees are European. So they're all kind of by definition non-native, but they're also endemic. So there are wild, non-native honeybee populations throughout the United States. And their preferred habitat is in the hollows of trees. They do not prefer to live in bee boxes, but we've found that that's a good way of moving them around. Most of the agriculture that relies on the pollination services of honeybees, do so in the boxes that only show up in their field for a short period of time, pollinate the crop, then they move to a different crop. But there are these kind of permanent resident honeybees in our area. Particularly, there's oak forests around here. Oak trees are a great potential habitat for honeybees, kind of wild honeybees. And so we set up these log hives to kind of basically make like a condominium for them. Like let's provide the exact like kind of shape and size that they want, and any wild bees that had been living in the area, maybe in kind of substandard housing, let's just give them a spot, like a reason to stay. Even though we don't need their pollination services, vines are self-pollinating, although the orchard, the apple orchard that we're planting, that will require pollination. But in general, we just kind of want to make like a little happy place for the honeybees to stick around Troon. So did you got some? Okay.
Can't really see it.
Yeah, you can see it a bit.
My
Yeah, so
back.
that's upside down. So that shows the hole in the log, like upside down. So that's about how big of a hollow it is. So it's like, I don't know, you could probably fit like maybe a milk jug in there. That's about the diameter of it. Maybe like it's about 2 to 3 milk jugs deep. And then you flip that over. The only hole is then on the bottom. You actually seal up that hole, and then there's small holes that are drilled in the front, so predators can't get in there. It's just the bees can fly in there, and we don't harvest the honey. Honey is meant for baby bees, quite frankly, and so it's a food source for the colony, and so we don't harvest the honey. Stays in there for the bees' use. Yeah. Other questions about wine or vineyard?
Do you have produce on the property as well?
Yeah. So right now, as it is, we have about like 250 linear feet of a vegetable garden at the moment, that we will, in the next couple of months, start planting out our summer vegetables. But this last year was just kind of the first experiment year. And then moving forward, we have, I think, about just under an acre of land that's under cover crop right now that we will then turn over and use as a larger vegetable garden that we're hoping to maybe put those vegetables out into the farmer's market, or maybe use them more towards farm dinners or something like that. But it's a really fun project, and feeds us, which is always fun. It's always nice. But yeah, so we are growing vegetables, and there has been like a little bit of a throwing around the idea of possibly doing a small like food forest, permaculture food forest down in that area at some point too. And this is at like the bottom of our property, which would be cool because then we could just implement some other fruit trees and bushes and perennial plants that can kind of work together in symbiosis to feed us as well, that we would basically not have to do anything to. But yeah.
Cool.
I have a quick question about cover crops. So I guess in terms of your cover crops, which ones do you normally choose to use in your vineyards? And do you feel like they impart flavor, or do you feel like they impart anything onto the grapes as well?
As far as flavor goes, I would say no. I don't really see much of a kind of impact on the flavor of the grapes from the actual crops themselves. But I bet Nate Wall could probably speak to this a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, so there definitely are certain plants that can apparently have an impact on growing grapes and can add flavor components. It's actually like with all the hemp in Southern Oregon, there's been some talk of whether hemp can impact the grape during development. I think a lot of people have probably had wines from vineyards ringed with eucalyptus, and eucalyptus absolutely can make it into the vines. But it's generally those kind of oilier plants like a eucalyptus or hemp, and the pollen from those in particular that land on the developing grapes, like basically before the grape almost forms around that pollen. That's where a lot of the impact comes from. The cover crops we use don't really have any of those characteristics, and they're also very low growing. So we kind of have, so a vineyard is obviously a monoculture, and the cover crop is really important to kind of diversify that area. I mean, when you think about it, there's actually quite a lot of available space for diversification in the vineyard. like ours, we have 8-foot spacings, and then 5 foot between rows. So, as with an 8x5 spacing, that means, you have like 8 feet of aisle between every, foot of vine row. So the majority of space in a vineyard is actually not vine, it's aisle. And all of that is ripe for planting with cover crops. So the trick is, from our perspective, particularly as we go towards no-till agriculture without just disking up and disturbing the soils, as well as we're trying to get to no-till under vine, which is the trickier one to get to keep the plants growing beneath the vines low enough to not interfere with the developing grapes. And we actually have under vine cover crop trials going on right now, where we have 6 different blends that we're seeing what we like best in terms of that under vine area. But in the larger vine aisle area, we generally plant a mix of grasses. It's about 75% grasses, 2 types of fescue and a perennial rye. What's great about the grasses is that the roots are fairly shallow. So as soon as, like I said, the spigot turns off in terms of our rain, and as soon as that rain stops, those grasses die within a month or so, as they used up the water that's available just in those upper several inches of soil. And that's great, because we don't want them to compete too directly with the vines for water availability. So what's kind of cool about the grasses and the vines is they almost have the inverse growing seasons. The grasses are really active when it's raining, and then they dry out and die right as the vines start perking up in the late spring. So we do the grasses, brassicas. So we have 2 types of brassicas, daikon radish and anemogon white mustard. Both of those, nitrogen fixers, which is great, pulls down kind of free fertilizer from the air into the soil, but also doesn't really affect the vines negatively in any ways. In fact, it positively adds, nitrogen back into the soil. The daikons also, if you've seen daikon radishes, they're huge. And so they create these physical air pockets in the soil. And if you just leave them there and they break apart and degrade, they basically really do a great job of opening up your soil, kind of making both the water and, permeability and the air. Vine roots require air. In waterlogged soils, they die most often due to lack of oxygen. But so that opens up the soil and allows that to get down there. And then we also have, even in our non-pollinator rows, we also have some habitat type mix. So like poppies and what else do we have in there? Like meadow flowers, alyssum, different kind of flowering plants to provide more habitat for insects in the cover crops. So those would be the only ones that really even had pollen to speak of. And I don't know if that would really encourage or add any floral characteristic to the grapes. I don't really see it.
And are you harvesting daikon, or is that just composting back into the soil?
Some of us are.
We did pull a couple out just for fun to see how big. I saw that they get really big. The main purpose is for them, like Nate said, to basically degrade in the soil and then create like its own little compost in there, and it also creates space and aerates naturally, which is what its purpose is. But I mean, if we feel like we want daikon for something, we just run out into the field and pull it out.
There are thousands of daikons out here.
That's going to be the awesome part is, when we can go back to normal and doing like dinners on the premises for people, if we can source all of our vegetables and like stuff and herbs from the property for the chefs. So I'm really looking forward to that, or maybe having a guest go and pick your own strawberry or whatever you want to do. It'd be really fun.
Hey, fast question. How do you all manage kind of all the organic byproduct on the site, whether it be kind of the spent pomace and stems and things like that from winemaking, or kind of any sort of additional, byproducts such as vegetable scraps, trimming, etc.? Is that a direct compost, or how do you kind of manage all of that now?
That's one of my favorite
compost
questions.
everything.
In the past, it's been it's only been direct compost, but actually, and I'll let Sarah talk about this in a second. It's we're also going to be vermicomposting. a lot of things with the food waste in particular. But our compost piles, 100% of the winery waste in terms of all the stems and skins and seeds and things, that goes directly into the compost, which is like why the compost is so important. So like what we do when we make the compost is we kind of make this like disgusting lasagna of like layers of poop and like hay that we grow ourselves. So there you go. There you go.
Oh.
Well, your background kind of like makes it disappear and
messes it up.
reappear, Nate. But so it's like layers of straw that we've grown. So organic biodynamic straw, and then organic dairy manure, and then all of the winery. There you go. All of the winery stems and seeds and things like that. And then we just kind of keep making layers. That's how we make our compost. But what's so cool about that then though is like, and we always want that to go into this compost because that compost gets spread out in our vineyards. And what happens is then all of the yeast and the native yeast, the non-Saccharomyces yeast, the bacteria in our winery ferments, all then go into the compost pile and they get spread throughout our vineyard. So it's this kind of like virtuous cycle, right? The ones from our winery that were really successful in our fermentations because they were successful because they dominated and they ended up fermenting those wines, that ends up being then broadcast back out through the vineyard. So what we would like to think, and we're doing microbiological studies to look at this point specifically, but we'd like to think that we're actually building up our reservoir of whatever yeasts are doing our ferments and bacteria in the vineyard as well. And we've seen that each year our ferments start like faster and cleaner than the year before. So much so that like, I mean, some of them we actually are like debating. So our main temperature control is just due to forklift. We ferment all of our reds and our oranges outside. And so if it's cold, we move it out into the sun. And if it's hot, we move it underneath the shade with forklift. So our temperature control for fermentation is via forklift. But in years past, we had always just kept them out underneath the sun all the time because they always struggled to kick off. It took them a while, which it does with all native ferments, because you're not adding billions of yeast into the mix. But it just took a while. But like in previous years, like we might want to actually keep them, in subsequent years, I should say, I think we might want to keep them under the trees a lot longer because like a lot of these are getting like much warmer than they have in previous years because those yeast take off faster and are even happier. So, I'm so used to doing one thing in one way, but it's a moving target because our vineyard is changing, our fruit is changing. And just because last year we had problems with, well, not problems, but it needed all the sunlight it could get to like make that ferment warm enough for the yeast to be happy. Like that wasn't the case this last year at all. If anything, a couple of them went maybe just a little faster than I would have liked. I like a longer, like just more gradual, fermentation, like 3+ weeks on skins, like, it just kind of builds up the heat and it just kind of holds it and then it falls. Like we actually had some that got pretty warm. And so they finished in a little under 3 weeks, which although, I mean, some Pinot Noir well in the valley will finish in like 4 days. So even the 2.5 weeks of ours are pretty good. But yeah, that is a very long answer to not the question you asked. But Sarah, I want to talk about the vermicompost and some of the other stuff.
Yeah, so basically we have our like 2 main ways of composting. The big one is when we want to compost our like grape pomace, we mix it up with the cow poop and the straw that we grow on our property. And that's our BD compost that we also inoculate with our biodynamic compost preparations too. And then like Nate says, it goes back out into the vineyard. But then we also are starting to do vermicompost, which is where if we have any vegetable scraps, food scraps, chicken, eggshells, whatever, maybe not too many of those because worms have a harder time with the sharp objects, but we will be using vermicompost in our compost tea that we will also then be spreading out through the vineyard, spraying in the vineyard through irrigation. And so that's a really exciting new development in the vineyard. We will be fertigating with our vermicompost. So everything is involved in this big closed loop system because of the composting. The composting is really key to the farming techniques that we're using.
No, that's awesome. And then, you know, kind of two other subsequent things. Do you guys do anything in terms of capturing, you know, whether it be wastewater, wastewater or rainwater, anything along those lines in order to assist with irrigation? And then, only other last question, which is unrelated, is what do you guys do with your spent barrels?
I'll answer the wastewater bit. So all of our winery waste is collected into a on-site. Well, it becomes a pond, but it's kind of like it's actually right by our biodynamic education center. So we're trying to have that be a natural system to kind of naturally degrade those. The largest waste that comes out of a winery is called BOD, biological oxygen demand. And that's because of all the dead yeast cells require oxygen to break down. And so what you want is to break that down, you would like a large pool that is aerated to assist in breaking that down so you don't end up with you know, just this gross, stinky pond. So this is not a natural pond. It's basically like a treatment pond that the water from the winery, as well as any washdown water from our tractors, and just the runoff from, we don't have very much pavement here, but we do right around the winery and the tasting room. That runoff water also goes into this pond, and so that's kind of, you know, it keeps it from getting into any waterways, and gives it some time to degrade, kind of naturally, just break down. And then what was the other question? I knew it was something.
The barrels.
Barrels, yeah.
So we have two different categories of spent barrels. We have the ones that are still good for winemaking, and then we have the ones that should just be used for decoration or furniture or something like that because they got too leaky or whatever. So we sell spent barrels.
Very nice to put their names down that want the barrels.
Yeah. And we get a lot of inquiries about barrels. Down here, it's a very big event area. There's a lot of weddings and things that happen. So people like to have barrels for tables or whatever. I'm actually like making a table with my partner out of one of our used barrels. But yeah, we like to try to reuse or recycle things as much as possible. And there's still plenty of barrels that we're not using anymore that are still great for winemaking. So if you know people who are looking for neutral oak, send them our way. We've got plenty.
Perfect, because I will take a ton of it to ferment hot sauce next year.
Oh, that's a good idea. That'd be cool.
Yeah, we have, like Sarah said, we've got barrels that are still structurally sound, you know, that will not leak, but we are done using them. Yeah. We cut a bunch of them in half. Oh, sorry. We cut a bunch of them in half because the last BD plant that we have not yet planted is the equisetum, the horsetail, because that, as many of the BD plants are actually, you know, what a lot of people consider weeds. But that one in particular, we just sawed to 5 of them in half to have 10 little planters for those, because we do want to be able to grow our own equisetum to do the horsetail spray. But if you plant it in the ground, it would just run rampant and we would never get it back again. It would just be everywhere. So we can.
That would be our only cover crop.
Yeah, the entire vineyard would be cover crop, which would not be a good thing. And sorry, Luke, you had another thing.
Oh no, I was just going to introduce Rob Finn runs Carnation Farms up here outside of about an hour east of Seattle. It's a beautiful organic property with, well, it's a huge operation, and I'm sure you guys can talk at length.
Great. Yeah, I didn't know there's another farmer on the call. That's nice to hear.
Yeah, I don't want to marginalize, but thank you guys for what you do. I'm very, very proud to carry all your SKUs and everything you guys put out. And have to say, definitely the Grenache this year was on my top 10. Fantastic work, and thank you so much for all that you do.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the support.
So nice to hear.
And our emails these days are pretty easy to guess for people, you know, probably, but mine is just Nate at Troon Vineyard, and Sarah and Nate W at Troon Vineyard. If you just want to follow up with an email, if you want any, you know, inquiries about the barrels, we'll love to help you out with that. Don't hesitate.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate that. Because again, we do a lot of like large scale ferments and things like that. So what we're doing this year actually is ramping up, and I don't want to go too deep into what we're doing, take away for you guys, but we're doing thousands of more chili plants. So I'm looking for really cool things. And when I actually tried it was the Bench Ambler Kubli, you know, that orange that you guys put out, I was like, holy smokes, like our we do a yellow chili, the Criollo Celia. And I was like, this works so perfectly. I was like, I wonder if I can get my hands on a barrel. So
Yeah, the amber wine is so good with spicy food. It's like my favorite pairing.
it's really incredible. And I think that's one of the interesting things about kind of all the wines that you guys are pushing out is that, you know, my background is Southeast Asian food. So it's always interesting to me to find a wine that can bend really well against those levels of sweetness and acidity and funk. And you've done a tremendous job. So thank you again.
There's a
Aw.
local restaurant around us that does a lot of koji mold infused dishes, from soups and everything. And any kind of savory Asian cuisine is perfect for those amber wines.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
Amazing. Well, we'll have to swap some barrels for some of our, you know, natural inoculated kojis out here.
Oh, we will
Yeah.
take you up on that.
All right, it's a deal. Luke and Trini, you'll get your VIG. What are we running? 10% at this point? No, I'm joking.
We just want an invite.
Yeah, anytime you guys want to
Invite's
come out
fine.
and visit.
Any other questions today? Well, thank you so much, Sarah and Nate, and well, I should say Nate and Sarah and Nate, maybe to keep it separate the Nates.
Alternating.
Alternating.
I know. That was bad.
Trini's created a YouTube channel. We keep records, recordings of all these, all of our Zoom meetings on YouTube channel. So the folks who couldn't join us today, they can watch the recording of our conversation at their leisure. So
Cool.
And thank you
you
for
so
the
much
opportunity.
again.
This has been very nice to be able to talk about, you know, what we love to do and with all of you and you know, hopefully a new year starts really well with us, and this is a good way to kick it off. And I appreciate your company.
I think
And-
we've all learned a lot today, and it's been great.
And yeah, I just want to, point out that Sarah and I will volunteer here, are definitely accessible. I mean, in terms of if you have questions that would certainly help you understand or better, place or sell our wines, please, feel free to contact us directly as well. We're definitely more than happy to, answer specific questions, or if, a certain account or whatever wants to know certain things, we can let you know as best we can.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your
Thank
day,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.